Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Unleash Your Voice. I have a solo episode for you today, and it all centers around my client, Shannon. On paper, Shannon was exactly who companies say they're looking for. She was director level. She had a strong track record. She'd stayed at all of the big, impressive tech companies she had worked at for a significant amount of time. Her last salary was $230K, and she'd actually been laid off from that job. But she was in a good position. She had a great network. She was getting interviews. She was making it to the second round, even the third round. But then something was happening that was preventing her from getting the offer. And when she came to me, she said something that I actually hear all the time. She said, I don't understand. I know I can do every single one of these jobs and do them well, but I feel like I can't prove it. Something is happening in the interviews that is planting doubt in the minds of the interviewers. And the truth is, it had absolutely nothing to do with her experience. This is what I call the articulation gap. It's the gap between the value you bring and how clearly you are communicating that value. Because here's what I see over and over again with high performing women. You're doing the work, you're leading the projects, you're driving results. But when it comes time to talk about it, you might hesitate. You soften, you default to we, and don't take full credit for your contributions. And suddenly you don't sound like the leader that you actually are. So when Shannon came to me and said this, and we had our first session, I asked her to walk me through some of her key answers. And one of the things I do with all of my clients is I want to know some of the biggest impact moments in their careers, right? Projects they've worked on, initiatives. So I asked her to walk me through, one of her biggest projects. And when she finished, honestly, my immediate reaction was, okay, well, that's nice, but I wasn't impressed. But I also know that when this happens, it's usually because I'm not getting the full story. And my job is to help my clients dive deeper, to really uncover those golden nuggets and to build the narrative that shows what actually happened and changed. It can be really hard to figure this out for yourself because you probably think, you look at some of the work you've done and you think, yeah, but that was my job. Or, of course, that's what I did. That's what I do every day. But you have to be able to talk about specific examples in the form of stories because interviewers want to know how you think, how you make decisions, how you identify problems or challenges, and how you solve them. So, this is what I realized was happening with Shannon. She actually had a lot of great experience and great initiatives and projects that were successful, but she wasn't clearly articulating how she contributed to making that happen. Let me actually tell you the story because I think that will help. So I asked her, tell me about one of the biggest projects that you worked on, that you led, and that comes up often in interviews that you are doing. So she said, well, I end up talking about the client onboarding process that I improved at the last company I worked at because it was cross-functional. I had to work with different teams and get multiple stakeholders on board. And it took a few months to complete. And yeah, it made a big difference in terms of the trust we had with our clients and also, made them want to stick around. And if you're listening to this right now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, that sounds like a great story. But here's the problem. What she owned in that project is very unclear from the way she was telling it. There was also no specificity. And if you've been to my storytelling workshops, you know how important details are in the science of storytelling. And also, she didn't clearly land her own impact, right? From the way she was telling it, I couldn't tell if she led the project or if she was just on the team that executed it. It really just sounded like she participated in something. And that is what makes the biggest difference when you tell the story effectively, right? It's the difference between, okay, well, she seems like a solid team member and she's a leader. We need her. So I started asking her questions, and this is where everything changed. I asked her, why did this project actually matter? And she said, well, our clients weren't completing their onboarding. Okay. And what happens if clients don't complete onboarding? She pauses and says, well, we lose them after a year. How much revenue are we talking about here? She says, millions. And that was the aha moment. Like, wait a minute, millions of dollars were at stake? And that wasn't in your story? Then I asked, had anyone ever tried to fix this onboarding process before? And she said, yeah, 3 other leaders actually. Well, did it work? No. I remember stopping her and saying, so 3 people tried to solve this and couldn't, and then you did? And then she had the aha moment. She just looked at me and said, I didn't think that it was that big of a deal, but you're making me see my own experience through a different lens. That's the moment that so many of my clients have. And I think of it sometimes as just I'm holding up a mirror through asking the right questions, right? But when we talk about building confidence and how that happens, this is an example of that. When somebody asks you the right questions, you start to see your own experience and value in a different way because of the way it's being reflected back to you. And that's exactly what happens here. So now all of a sudden, this story is completely different, right? She saved her company millions of dollars, and 3 other people have tried to fix this broken onboarding process before and hadn't been able to, and then she came along and was able to do it in a matter of months. So, this is the moment I really want you to hear, because Shannon didn't lack experience. She lacked perspective on her own value. And this is what I see all the time. You're so close to your work that you think what you do is normal, but it's not. So when we rebuilt her story, suddenly it became a company-wide problem costing millions of dollars, 3 failed attempts before her, a completely different strategy that she proposed, stakeholder alignment that wouldn't have happened without her ways of negotiating and rallying stakeholders, her execution plan that she developed on her own. The end results? A 50% increase in client onboarding completion and millions of dollars in revenue protected. Same project, completely different story. Same experience, but now she sounded like a director. Okay, let me actually share the full story with you just so that you can actually hear what it sounded like. And I will say this is the written version. So, of course, Shannon delivered it with her own style and personality. But I want you to hear how powerful this story is. In my previous role as Director of Customer Success, I was tasked with revamping our client onboarding process. This was a company-wide priority that year because clients weren't completing onboarding, and that was costing the business millions of dollars in lost renewals. When I stepped in, 3 leaders before me had already attempted to fix this process without success, so I knew I needed to take a different approach. I started by interviewing key stakeholders across engineering and client facing teams to diagnose the root issues while also building alignment and trust with everyone involved early in the process. Then I drew on my experience from a previous company that had a high performing onboarding model. I developed a new strategy and secured buy in by meeting with those stakeholders individually before bringing the group together and sharing the plan with the wider team. Once we were all aligned, I led a 3-month cross functional execution plan, and I introduced a pilot program with select clients to validate the new process in real time. The feedback was immediate and extremely positive. Within 6 months, we managed to increase onboarding completion rates by 50%, significantly improving retention and protecting millions in recurring revenue. This approach, combining stakeholder alignment with structured execution, is something I've continued to apply when leading complex cross-functional initiatives. Do you see how powerful that story became? Right? And how she really took ownership, right? I made sure when I rebuilt that story for her that there was a lot of that it was very clear what she led and the business impact she had. So she took this story into her next interview. It was a final round interview. She had to do a presentation, and she actually used this story in her presentation. 2 hours after her interview, she got the offer, a $250,000 offer. And the recruiter said to her, "You know what? We haven't even finished interviewing the other candidates, but the hiring team messaged me right after your interview and said, we don't want to risk losing her. So let's get the offer out to her right away." Let that sink in for a minute. They didn't want to risk losing her. So they sent her the offer right away. So let's just pull back for a minute here because I want to remind you what actually changed. Not her resume, not her experience, not her qualifications. The only thing that changed was how she articulated her value. And this is the part I need you to hear. If you don't name your impact, people will underestimate it because no one is sitting there in your interview thinking, I bet she did something really impressive, but just didn't say it. No, they're taking your words at face value. And if your language is vague, if it's collaborative to the point of making you invisible, if it's minimizing your impact, then you're making yourself sound more junior than you are. So if you're hearing this and you're thinking, I know I'm capable of more, I just don't know how to show it, this is your sign. You do not have a capability gap, you have an articulation gap. And closing that gap is what turns "she seems great" into "we need her in this role." If you're ready to address that articulation gap, the best way to do that is by starting with your power story. And I am actually hosting a workshop soon called the Power Story and Presence Workshop, where I will walk you through exactly how to build your power story. You'll also learn how to nail first impressions, especially in high stakes situations like networking or conversations about raises and promotions, and of course, all important job interviews. You'll also learn some leadership language swaps. This is so important. So, how do you get out of that minimizing language? How do you get away from that validation seeking language? We're going to cover all of that in the Power Story and Presence workshop. You can find a link to sign up in the show notes, or you can DM me Presence on social media and I will get you signed up. Thanks so much for joining this week here on Unleash Your Voice, and I will see you next week.